Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, dear learners. Welcome to the live session of Economic Growth and Development. Please feel free to post questions on the YouTube window. And we have received a few questions on the Google Sheet that was distributed. So I'll take up some of these points in this
Good afternoon, dear
presentation.
learners. Welcome to the live session of Economic Growth and Development. Please feel free to post questions on the YouTube window. And we have received a few questions on the Google Sheet that was distributed. So I'll take up some of these points.
So to continue with the questions that were posted on the Google Sheet, we had a few questions on the difference between utilitarianism and basic needs approach. Let me continue with some of these points that were asked. Can you hear me, Sasanka? Okay. So we have discussed in the course utilitarianism and basic needs approach mostly in the context of capability or capabilities approach of Amartya Sen. And the fundamental notion of utilitarianism is based on how we value a commodity or a set of commodities. So when we talk about utilitarianism as a value-based approach, we are basically trying to understand in terms of what is the utility that we attach to a certain commodity or a set of commodities, or in other words, we value based on what utility that commodity or set of commodities has for an individual. So in this sense here, utilitarianism is basically referring to the concept of utility, which refers to pleasure or happiness or satisfaction that we derive out of a commodity. Now understand that these two approaches of utilitarianism and basic needs approach are significantly used in economic policy thinking and economic policy implementation. But the reason and justification for introducing the learners of growth and development to these two concepts was mostly to etch out the major differences and significant differences between capabilities approach vis-a-vis utilitarianism and basic needs approach. So there are three basic concepts or components surrounding the idea of utilitarianism. Now the idea of utilitarianism has also undergone a lot of changes over a period of time. However, the classical form of utilitarianism, the way we understand in neoclassical economics, can be discussed under three components. These are consequentialism, welfarism, and sum ranking. These are the three components of classical utilitarianism. So, when we are talking about utilitarian or utilitarianistic value judgment with regard to the choices that an individual is making or a group of individuals are making, we are mostly talking about all these three components in total, or all these three components taken together. Now, what is consequentialism? Consequentialism is basically that aspect of utilitarianism which claims that all choices that an individual makes is guided by the consequences of making that choice or the results that they generate, which means that the choice that an individual is making or a group of individuals are making is primarily guided by the fact that what is the utility that they are deriving out of it. In other words, what is the consequences of making that choice, and usually these consequences are quantifiable. Um, in the course, I have taken the example of, let us say, the reservation policy. So if there is a certain, and a reservation policy, for example, has a certain stated objective of providing basic resources or better resources to worse off sections of the community and so on, right? So in terms of making a choice with regard to a commodities, consequentialism aspect of utilitarianism basically tries to look at what is the utility that we want to achieve because of the choice that we have made as an individual or a group of individuals. But that is not enough. It has to be combined with the aspect of welfarism. Now, welfarism refers to a judgment regarding the relative goodness of alternative choices that an individual is faced with. Often, as a rational individual, we are faced with different kinds of choices. In economics, we take the example of bundles of goods and services. So when we are making a choice with regard to two or more different kinds of bundles of goods and services, we have to make a value judgment with regard to the relative goodness of one choice over the other, right? So such value judgment is exclusively based on what is the individual utility that one derives out of such commodities. Suppose I have two different kinds of food baskets and I have to make a choice between these two kinds of food baskets. I have to make a choice based upon what is the utility that I will derive out of one bundle with respect to the other. And this concept of welfarism is combined with consequentialism, and they together fulfill the requirement that every choice must be judged by the respective utilities it generates. So, for example, any action which is judged by the consequent states of affairs and the consequent state of is judged by, and the consequent state of affairs is judged by the utilities in that situation also is because of welfarism. So in terms of welfarism, we are basically looking at what are the total benefits derived out of a particular economic policy to a certain section out of the total population without consideration of whether or not we are meeting the goals of social justice. Now here you may recall that when we are talking about utilitarianism or as against the idea of capability approach comes from a higher place where we are also keeping in mind the ideas of distributive justice, human rights, and then we take a decision with regard to what is the kind of policy and who would get benefited out of a certain kind of policy, right? As opposed to the high ground from where capability approach is coming from, utilitarianism is not really providing any scope to meet the goals of social justice here. They are mostly guided by the ideas of consequentialism, welfarism, and the last component, which is sum ranking, and this basically follows the idea of maximum satisfaction of the greatest numbers without any concern for distributive justice. So if the sum total satisfaction derived out of a bundle of commodities in a society is large, then we would say that we are guided by the idea of utilitarianism as opposed to distributive justice. So when we talk about the utility derived out of different commodities that individuals are making choice for or providing a choice for in a market, We are considering all these three components taken together, which comprises the traditional idea or the classical idea of what is called utilitarianism. The basic needs approach is one of the competing approaches when we look at the capabilities approach. It was introduced by the International Labour Organization in the 1970s as a measure of absolute poverty. And the basic needs approach is somewhat similar to utilitarianism because it derives its basic idea from the fact that what is the utility one derives out of different resources that one may have access to over a period of time or during their lifetime, right? So the basic needs approach gives priority to meeting people's basic needs by ensuring that there are sufficiently distributed basic needs or goods and services that can sustain the human lives at a minimally decent level. So for example, in the basic needs approach, we are mostly focusing about housing, about health, about different kinds of access to basic to nutritious food. So there's a list of goods and services that people should have access to, which will make their life meaningful. And this is quite different from the way capabilities approach have been thought about, because in the capability approach we are mostly talking about enhancing the capabilities of people and not necessarily focusing on what are the basic resources that we need to provide to people. So this is again the one of the minute differences between the basic needs approach and capabilities approach. But in terms of an idea, the basic needs approach is borrowing a lot from utilitarianism, because how do we come up with a list of goods and services that needs to be distributed to people? That is primarily because there is a utility attached to the different kinds of resource that people want to have. So BNA gives emphasis on material resources and their importance in mitigating poverty. I hope what I have just discussed is clear. However, I'm open to more questions on this if required. Is there any internship opportunity available? You can write to individual faculty members for these questions. Please utilize this time to ask questions pertaining to doubts that you may have in the course that you have studied. The pattern of exam paper is multiple choice questions, and it's more or less the same format as you have been writing your assignments. So you need to study your materials carefully. Please utilize this time to ask questions pertaining to your course. the limitations of including multiple variables in measuring human development index. Now, this is a good question. You must have, if you have read the human development index materials carefully, you would see that there are three very significant components that are taken for measurement of human development index. And we have also covered as part of this module on human development that there are various coming from the concept of capabilities approach. There are of course many more indicators other than education, health, and income, which goes to which goes to tell us a lot about the human development status of an individual or a country. But these three components are chosen as the representative indicators because there are various externalities attached to education and health and income. So if you have access to education, you can have access to various other components. For example, the right to life, or the right to human dignity, the right to political participation, the right to participation in labor markets. These are all indicators that can also be taken for measurement of the human development index. But the fact that one already has access to good quality education or good quality health or income, some level of income, are also the primary indicators, which goes to say that these people may also have access to other important indicators of life and well-being. So in that sense, these three components of education, health, and income are some of the significant components that surely justifies, or that surely guarantees access to many more well-being indicators. So that's one of the reasons for not crowding the human development index with many more indicators. Because then there would also be issues with regard to what weight to provide to each of these the components or indicators that can be taken up. But education, health, and income, based upon various kinds of empirical studies and the experiences of countries with regard to the development experience, we have studied that these continue to be the three important components that have intergenerational effects, that have various kinds of positive externalities that can be summed up in these three important components. So this is one of the reasons for considering education, health, and income. And this also explains the limitations as to why including multiple variables might affect the index in such a manner that we may not be able to conclude. It may not be able to give us a summary index with regard to what is the status of human development of these countries. So in that sense, this can be considered, including multiple indicators can be considered as a limitation. But since you have asked this question, I may also point to you the fact that we have studied about the multidimensional poverty index, which actually includes various other indicators other than education and health. And that is to again talk about which also can be considered as some form of human development index, definitely. But there are attempts to considering multidimensional poverty index by including many more variables as opposed to what we have seen in the human development index. I hope I have answered your question, and this is the direction in which you wanted to understand the question. To all the learners who have been taking this course, let me also remind you that one of the beginning points from how we started this course is to familiarize not just students of economics but also students of other disciplines to some of the basic concepts of growth and development, because the concepts of growth and development is not necessarily confined to economics domain. It is also it has a lot of utility for those coming from the other disciplines as well. And one of the basic ideas of introducing this course was to familiarize a student of non-economics to the very basic concepts of growth and development, to be able to make sense of the general literature of what is it that we are discussing when we are talking about growth and development. And I hope it has been useful for students from a non-economics background as well. That said, it should be of immense use to students from the economics background also, for those who are trying to get themselves initiated to research in development economics. Hi Mukul, if you're asking a question on the critical minimum efforts thesis, I hope you have made yourself relevant, made yourselves familiar with the with Hirschman's thesis, and it's basically talking about the balanced and unbalanced growth models. And when in with respect to the critical minimum efforts thesis, it's basically talking about an unbalanced growth model where there are certain sectors within the economy which are identified for more for more investments, and that is being summarized in the context of critical minimum effort thesis of Hirschman. So please go through the reading material, the transcript of the relevant module, and this in a nutshell, critical minimum effort thesis refers to the unbalanced growth model and the investment efforts required for certain specific sectors of the economy. However, the background to these growth models, why these growth models were introduced, and what are the limitations, and what are the the economic policies surrounding this, I urge you to please go through the transcripts. Kindly brief about deprivation index. I hope you're talking about the multidimensional poverty index. In the relevant sections of human development literature, I have mentioned that when we are talking about human development, we are mostly talking in terms of achievements. What are the achievements of different countries with respect to education, with respect to health, with respect to income, or for that matter, if we are looking at inequality adjusted human development index, and what are the different kinds of achievements with regard to different genders, or also with regard to the inequality across different genders, and inequalities, income inequality, or inequalities in different levels of human development by the different components. But when we are talking about, but generally when we talk about human development index, we are mostly talking about achievements. But the deprivation is also equally important, which means that we highlight which are the countries which are showing a lot of deprivation with respect to different indicators. It is in this context that we are studying about multidimensional poverty index, which is basically a deprivation index. We are measuring what are the different counts, or what are the different indicators, and by how many counts are the different countries facing deprivation, right? So in that sense, there is a difference between achievement index, which is the human development index, and a deprivation index, which is a multidimensional poverty index. Okay. Limitations of multiple variables in measuring HDI index. I have discussed this in the beginning of this live interaction. I advise you to please go through the discussion that we just had a couple of minutes back. What is the difference between Harrod-Domar and the Solow growth model? The Harrod-Domar model is basically talking about a steady state equilibrium analysis of the economy based upon the capital output ratio that is required in the economy. But the Solow growth model is talking about the importance of knowledge creation in the economy and what impact it has on economic growth of a country. Please go through the transcripts, which brings about some simplified ideas surrounding the Harrod-Domar and the Solow growth model. Is modern economic growth driver by only technology? The way the modern economic growth as a concept has been discussed by Simon Kuznets, technology was one of the important drivers of economic growth, and the empirical studies surrounding growth and development if you have studied a little bit about the convergence models and the divergence models, you would see that there is a lot of discussion surrounding country convergence, right? When we are studying growth models, one of the basic points from where we begin our discussion is whether there is a tendency for the developing countries to converge with the developed countries in terms of the levels of development. And empirical studies do tell us that if we compare the developing countries with the developed countries, then it looks like technology is one of the important drivers of economic growth and economic growth. However, that said, it definitely does not mean that technology is the only important driver. But one cannot not consider technology as an important driver of economic growth. Is there any country that follow these models? Yes, the developed countries seem to have followed these growth models. And if you look at the criticisms of some of these growth models, you will see that when we studied the strains in development thought or the different development thinkers as part of this course, you would recall that we did discuss about the downside of following these growth models in the context of developing countries blindly. For example, the focus on capital intensive technologies or the use of capital in the growth process of a country, when developing countries definitely are more labor intensive, have more labor widening process or labor deepening processes, then how does a Harrod-Domar growth model become applicable to where the developing countries from the point where they begun from? So these are some of the criticisms of following the Harrod-Domar and the Solow growth model, which were mostly conceptualized in the context of the developed countries of the world. In the context of India, which type of growth and development we prefer? There are various kinds of growth models that have been discussed in the context of India, which we have, since the focus of this course was to look at, the focus of this course was to look at some of the generic models that have been discussed in the context of growth and development. We did not discuss some of the important growth models or development models that have been discussed in the context of India, but balanced and unbalanced growth models are definitely being discussed in the context of India, where the focus should be on development on certain sectors. Mahalanobis growth model is one model which has received a lot of importance in the context of India, and so on. Could you please tell the objective of all models in one sentence, as it helps to remember for a long time? Well, it is unfortunate that we cannot discuss about all of these models in one sentence, but even if I have to make an attempt to tell you all about what is the objective of looking at all of these models, which I think is a good question to ask, that why are we reading all of these models? What is the point of looking at all of these models? And that is mainly because, and I think my answer to that is that in the context of studying growth and development economics or economic growth and development, we begin with the basic idea that why is it that certain countries of the world have very high standards of living, have very good access to technology, have better conditions of living, have high levels of income, whereas there are those other sets of countries which are lagging behind with respect to technology and many other indicators of development. And the reason for looking at these models is to see, can we create certain conditions so that the developing countries can catch up with the developed countries, in the sense that we can reach some kind of a convergence with respect to the developing countries and the developed countries. But of course, these are, as I said, generic models which are proposed. That in fact, the Harrod-Domar model, for example, actually proposes that labor and capital should be used in a certain ratio to be able to achieve development and growth, right? So these models are providing some kind of a some are leading the way towards what are the different combinations in which different resources of the economy can be utilized to reach a certain stage of development. So the basic question that we are trying to understand in the concept of growth and development models is whether this kind of a convergence is possible or not. There are many economists who have started talking about one world economy. Why is it that we are talking about so many different kinds of development? Why is it that we are looking at so many different levels of living standards across different countries? So I think this is one of the basic questions that one is trying to understand with the help of these growth models. Specify which index shows shortfall levels from desirable development. See, as far as indices are concerned, you can construct as many indices as you want to, depending upon your objective at hand. Some of the important indices that we have studied with respect to understanding achievements of human development or the deprivations that we are seeing with respect to human development. One is the Human Development Index, and deprivations we are seeing, we can calculate or estimate by constructing a multidimensional poverty index, which is basically telling us how many people are poor in certain households, or how many countries, what are the different levels of multidimensional poverty, the different that people are facing in different countries of the world. So these are two broad indices that we have studied. However, depending upon your objective at hand, you may want to construct as many indices as you want to, whether you want to construct an achievement index or you want to construct a deprivation index, depends upon the indicators that you want to take, and then you can construct it. Thank you all the learners for putting the questions. I would again thank you for being patient and going through the course. For some of these questions around developing countries, developed countries, what models to follow and so on, I would urge all of you to go through some of the references that I have given at the end of each of the lectures, which will enhance your learning and your understanding about some of the basic concepts that we have done in this course. As I keep telling that the basic idea behind this course is to familiarize you with some of the concepts. However, this is only the beginning. Some of the reference materials that I have provided at the end of each of the lesson is an important storehouse of knowledge. Many of them you will find freely available on the internet in various platforms. Please go through those references and so that you can participate better in these kinds of discussions on development and growth. Thank you very much.